Hello, brovs. We're back with Cruel as the Grave by Eden Southworth. Chapter 28, I believe it is. Yes. A ghastly procession. If charnel houses and our graves must send those that we bury back, our monument shall be the maws of kites. Shakespeare. Well, exclaimed Mr. Berners eagerly, well, the flight is now discovered beyond all doubt. Search warrants have been issued. My house is to be searched among the rest, replied Captain Pendleton. What else? Arrangements are being made for the funeral of the dead woman. They will bury her the day after tomorrow in the churchyard at Blackville. And what else? Nothing, but I would not permit Joe to accompany me tonight. More precaution is now necessary to ensure your safety. And that is all? Yes. Then come in and see Sybil. They went in together, where Mrs. Berners greeted Captain Pendleton with her usual courtesy, and then immediately repeated her anxious questions. Has the murderer been discovered? May we go home? Not yet, dear madam, answered Pendleton to both questions as he sat down by the fire. I have something to tell you, Pendleton, and to ask your advice about, began Lion Berners. And he related the mysterious vision that had thrice crossed their path. Oh, it is a form of flesh and blood. We don't believe in apparitions at this age of the world. But this indeed must be looked to. If you have seen her 3 times, of course she has seen you, said Captain Pendleton in much anxiety. Most certainly she knows of our presence here, if she knows nothing else about us, replied Mr. Berners. Then it is useless to attempt to conceal yourselves from her. She must be laid hold of, talked with, and won or bribed to keep our secret, to help us if possible. We must find out whether she will serve our purpose. If she will, it will all be quite right. And you may remain here until it is safe to depart, but if she will not, it will be all entirely wrong, and you must leave this place at all hazards, concluded Captain Pendleton. Yes, it is very well for you to talk of intercepting her, but you had just as well try to intercept a shadow as it glides past you, put in Sybil with a wise nod. The attempt shall be made at all events, determined Mr. Berners. Sybil was in the act of putting the supper, not on the table, for the table there was none in the chapel, but on the cloth spread upon the flagstones, when Captain Pendleton, to give a lighter turn to her talk, said, You may put a plate for me also, Mrs. Berners. I have not yet supped, and I'm glad I have got here in time to join you. I am glad, too. We are getting quite comfortably to housekeeping here, Captain, and Lion has set his traps, and we shall soon have game to offer you when you come to visit us, replied Sybil quickly, responding to his gaiety. If I had only a gun and could venture to use it, it would be a great relief, and we should be very well supplied, smiled Lion. Yes, if you had a gun, and should venture to use it, you would soon bring a posse comitatus down upon you. We will have no reverberations of that sort, if you please, Lion, recommended the captain. And then they all sat down around the tablecloth, and Sybil poured out and served the coffee. Now, whether they were very thirsty or whether the coffee was unusually good, or whether both these causes combined to tempt them to excess, is not known, but it is certain that the 2 gentlemen were intemperate in their abuse of this fragrant beverage, which proves that people can be intemperate in other drinks as well as in alcoholic liquors. This coffee also got into their heads. Their spirits rose. They grew gay, talkative, inspired, brilliant. Even Sybil, who took but 1 cup of coffee, caught the infection, and laughed and talked and enjoyed herself as if she were at a picnic instead of being in hiding for her life or liberty. In a word, some strange exhilaration, some wonderful intoxication pervaded the little party. But the most marvelous symptom of their case was that they talked no nonsense, that while under their adverse and perilous circumstances, such gaiety was unnatural and irrational. Yet their minds were clear and their utterances brilliant, and this abnormal exaltation of intellect and elevation of spirit continued for several hours, long into the night. Then the great reaction came. First, Sybil grew very quiet, though not in the least degree sad. Lion Burners evinced a disposition rather to listen than to talk, and finally Captain Pendleton arose, and saying that this had been one of the strangest and pleasantest evenings he had ever passed in his life, took leave of his friends and departed. Sybil was very sleepy, and as soon as their guest was gone, she asked Lion to help her with the mattress. That she was so drowsy she could scarcely move. He begged her to sit still, for that he himself would do all that was necessary. And with much good will, but also much awkwardness, he spread the couch, and then went to tell Sybil it was ready. But he found her with her head upon her knees, apparently fast asleep. He lifted her gently in his arms and carried her and laid her on the mattress, and then, feeling overcome with drowsiness, he threw himself down beside her and fell into a profound sleep. But Sybil, as she afterwards told, did not sleep so deeply. It seemed indeed less sleep than stupor that overcame her. She was conscious when her husband raised her up in his arms and laid her on the bed, but she was too utterly oppressed with stupor and weariness to lift her eyes to look, or open her lips to speak, or, even after he had laid her down, to move a limb from the position into which it fell. So she lay like one dead, except in being clearly conscious of all that was going on around her. She knew when Lion laid down and when he went to sleep. And still she lay in that heavy state, which was once a profound repose and a clear consciousness, for perhaps an hour longer, when suddenly the stillness of the scene was stirred by a sound so slight that it could only have been heard by one whose senses were, like hers at that time, preternaturally, how do you say that word? Preternaturally acute. The sound was of the slow, cautious turning of a door upon its hinges. Without moving hand or foot, she just languidly lifted her eyelids and looked around upon the dim darkness. There was a faint glow from the smoldering fire on the flagstone floor, and there was a faint light from the starlit night coming through the windows. By the aid of these she saw, as in a dream, the door of the vault wide open. In her profound state of conscious repose there was no fear of danger, and no wish to move. So, still as in a dream, she witnessed what followed. First, a dark shrouded figure issued from the vault and turned around and bent down toward it, as if speaking to someone within, but no word was heard. Then the figure backed a pace, drawing up from the steps of the vault what seemed to be a long, narrow box. As this box came up, it was followed by another dark, shrouded figure who supported its other end. And as the two mysterious apparitions now stood beside the altar, Sybil saw that the box that they held between them was a coffin. Nor was that all. While they moved a little down the side walls, they were followed by two other strange figures issuing from the vault in the same order, and bearing between them in the same manner a second coffin. And as they, in their turn, filed down the side wall, they also were followed by still two others coming up out of the vault and bringing with them a third coffin. And then a ghastly procession formed against the side wall, 3 long, shadowy coffins, borne by 6 dark, shrouded figures, filed past the Gothic windows and disappeared through the open chapel door. Sybil clearly saw all this, as in a nightmare from which she could not escape. She still lay motionless, speechless, and helpless until she quite lost consciousness in a profound and dreamless sleep. So deep and heavy was this sleep that she had no sense of existence for many hours. When at length she did awake, it seemed almost to a new life, so utterly for a time was all that had recently passed forgotten. But as she arose and looked around and collected her faculties and remembered her position, she was astonished to see by the shining of the sun into the western windows that it was late in the afternoon and that she had slept nearly all day, for her husband was still sleeping heavily. Then she remembered the horrible vision of the night, and she looked anxiously towards the door of the vault. It seemed fast as ever. She got up and went to look at it. It was fast, the bars firmly held in the solid masonry, as they had been before. What then had been the vision? She shuddered to think of it. Her first impulse was now to arouse her husband and tell him what had happened. But her tenderness for him pleaded with her to forbear. He sleeps well, poor lion. Let him sleep, she said. And she threw a shawl all around her shoulders and went out of the chapel to get a breath of the fresh morning air. She had to pass among the gray old gravestones lying deep in the bright-colored, dew-spangled brushwood. As she picked her way past them, she suddenly stopped and screamed. Captain Pendleton was lying prostrate like a dead man at the foot of an old tree. With a strong effort of the will, she controlled herself sufficiently to enable her to approach and examine him. He was not dead, as she had at first supposed, but he was in a very death-like sleep. She arose to her feet and clasped her forehead with both hands while she tried to think. What could these things mean? The unnatural exhilaration of their little party on the previous evening, the powerful reaction that prostrated them all in a heavy stupor or dreamless sleep that had lasted some 15 hours, the ghastly procession she had seen issue from the open door of the old vault and march slowly down the east wall of the church past all the Gothic windows and disappear through the front door. The spell that had so deeply bound her own faculties that she had neither the power nor the will to call out. Their visitor, overtaken by sleep while on his way to mount his horse, and now lying prostrate among the gravestones. What could all these things mean? She could not imagine. However much she might have wished to spare her husband's rest up to this moment, she felt that she must arouse him now. She hurried back into the church and went up to the little couch and looked at Lion. He was moving restlessly and mutterly sadly in his sleep. Mutterly. And now she felt less reluctance to wake him from his troubled dream. She shook him gently and called him. He opened his eyes, gazed at her, rose up in a sitting posture, and stared around for a moment, and then seeing his wife, exclaimed, "Oh, is that you, Sybil? What is this? The chapel seems to be turned around." And he gazed again at the western windows, where the sun was shining and which he mistook for the eastern, supposing the time to be morning. "The chapel is not turned around, Lion, but the sun has. It is late in the afternoon, and that is the declining and not the rising sun that you see." "Good gracious, Sybil, have I slept so late as this? Why did you let me?" "Because I slept myself. We all slept, even to Captain Pendleton, who must have been overpowered by sleep on his way to his horse, for I have just found him lying among the gravestones." "What? Who? Pendleton asleep among the gravestones? Say that again. I don't understand." Sybil briefly repeated her statement. Lion started up, shook himself as if to arouse all his faculties, and then went and douched his head and face with cold water, and finally, as he dried them, he turned to Sybil and said, "What is all this that you tell me? Where is Pendleton? Come and show me." Sybil led the way to the spot where their friend lay in his heavy sleep. "Good heaven, he must have fallen down or sunk down here within 3 minutes of leaving the church," exclaimed Lion Berners, gazing on the sleeper. "Something must have happened to us all, dear Lion. Do you remember how unreasonably gay we all were at supper last evening? We two, who had never had every reason to be very grave and even sad. And do you remember the reaction when we all grew so drowsy that we could hardly keep our eyes open? And then there was something else, which I will tell you of by and by. And now we have all slept 15 or 16 hours. Something strange has happened to us," said Sybil slowly. "Something has, indeed. But now we must arouse Pendleton. Good heaven! He may have caught his death by sleeping out all night," exclaimed Mr. Berners, as he stooped down and shook the sleeper. But it was not without difficulty that Lyon succeeded in arousing Captain Pendleton, who, when he was fairly upon his feet, reeled like a drunken man. "Pendleton, Pendleton, wake up!" "What, man? What has happened to you?" exclaimed Lyon, trying to steady the other upon his feet. "Too late for roll call. Bad example to the rank and file," murmured the captain, with some remnant of a camp dream lingering in his mind. Mr. Berners shook him roughly while Sybil dipped up a double handful of water from a little spring at their feet and threw it up into his face. This fairly aroused him. "Whew, whew! Fizz, what's that for? What the demon's all this? What's the matter?" he exclaimed, sneezing, coughing, and sputtering through the water that Sybil had flung into his face. "What's all this?" exclaimed Lyon Berners, echoing his question. "It is that we are all robbed and murdered and carried into captivity, for all I know," he added, smiling as he could not fail to do at the droll figure cut by his friend. "How the deuce came I here?" demanded Pendleton, glaring around with his mouth and eyes wide open. "Is this enchantment?" "Something very like it, Pendleton. But come, man, this is no laughing matter. It is very serious. Therefore rouse yourself and collect your faculties. You will need them all, I assure you," gravely replied Lyon Berners. "But how in thunder came I here?" again demanded the captain, shivering and staring around him. "We cannot tell. My wife found you here about half an hour ago. You were supposed to have been overcome by drowsiness while on your way to your horse, and to have sunk down here and slept from that time to this, some 16 hours. Good! I remember taking leave of you both after our lively supper of last evening and starting for the thicket and giving way just here to an irresistible feeling of drowsiness and sinking down with the dreamy idea that I would not go to sleep, but would soon arise and pursue my journey. And I have lain here all night?" he exclaimed in astonishment. "Yes, and all day," added Lyon solemnly. "How is it that I was not awakened before?" demanded the captain with an injured look. "Because we ourselves were in the same condition. It is not more than 15 minutes since my wife awakened me." "In the name of heaven, then what has befallen us all?" demanded the captain in amazement. "That is what we must try to find out. You must help us. I have been thinking rapidly while standing here, and the result is that I judge we have all been drugged with opium. But whether by accident or with design, or if with design, by whom, or with what purpose, I cannot even imagine, though I do vaguely connect the fact with the mysterious visitant of the chapel," replied Mr. Berners. While he spoke, they all turned their steps towards the chapel, and with his concluding words they entered it in company. The housekeeping corner of the chapel was in a state of confusion, very much at variance with the young housekeeper's fastidiously tidy habits. The supper dishes lay upon the tablecloth on the floor, where they had been uncared for by the drugged and drowsy pair, and the little bed remained unmade, as it had been left by them when they ran out to look after Captain Pendleton. Sybil saw all this at a glance, and with a flush, and forgetting for a moment everything else, she bade her husband and his guests stop where they were until she had put her house in order. In this limited manner of domestic economy, it took Sybil but 10 minutes to make the bed and wash the dishes, and meanwhile Lyon Berners made up the fire, and Clement Pendleton brought a pail of fresh water from the fountain. Sybil began to prepare the breakfast, but none of the party felt like eating it, and that is another sign of opium. "We have no appetite," observed Lyon Berners as they sat down around the tablecloth, and instead of discussing the viands before them, never heard of that word, they discussed the events of the preceding day and night. Lyon Berners remembered that Sybil and himself had spent nearly the whole of the preceding afternoon in rambling through the woods, and he suggested as the only solution of the mystery that during their absence someone had entered the chapel and put opium in their food and drink. "Someone, but whom?" inquired Captain Pendleton incredulously. "Most probably the girl whom we have seen here," answered Mr. Berners. "But for what purpose do you think she drugged your drink?" "To throw us into a deep sleep for many hours, which would enable her to come and go to and from the chapel, undiscovered and unmolested." "But why should she wish to come back and forth to such a dreary, empty old place as this?" Ah, that I cannot tell. At that point, conjecture is utterly baffled, answered Lion. Yes, because conjecture has been pursuing a phantom that vanishes upon being nearly approached. I cannot accept your theory of the mystery, Berners. And what is worse, I cannot substitute one of my own, said Captain Pendleton, shaking his head. And now I have something to reveal, said Sybil, solemnly. Another morning dream, inquired Lion, while Pendleton looked up with interest. No, a reality, a ghastly, horrible reality, she answered. And while both looked at her with strange, deep interest and curiosity, she related her sepulchral experiences of the night, when with pale cheeks and shuddering frame she described the 6 dark, shrouded forms that had come up out of the vault bearing long, shadowy coffins, which they carried in a slow procession down along the east wall past the Gothic windows and out at the front door. Her 2 listeners looked at her and then at each other in amazement and incredulity. It was an opium dream, said Mr. Berners in a positive manner. It would be useless, dear Lion, for me to tell you that I was rather wider awake than I am now. Yet I really was, said Sybil, with equal assurance. And yet you did not lift hand or voice to call my attention to what was going on. I did not wish to do it. My will seemed palsied. I could only gaze at the awful procession and think how ghastly it was. And thinking so, I sank into a dreamless sleep and knew no more until I woke up this afternoon. Meanwhile, let us go and look at the door of the vault. You say that the door was wide open, inquired Captain Pendleton. Of course it was wide open. That is, wide open last night when those horrible forms came up out of the vault. But this morning it was fast enough, answered Sybil. Oh, exclaimed Mr. Berners. I know what that "oh" means, Lion, but I hope before we leave this chapel you will find out that I can distinguish a dream from a dreadful reality, observed his wife. Meanwhile, they had reached the iron door of the vault. It was fast. Pendleton took hold of the iron bars and tried to shake it, but the bars were bedded in solid stone, and the door was immovable. Then he looked through the grating down into the depths below. But he only saw the top of the staircase, the bottom of which disappeared in the darkness. My dear Mrs. Berners, he then said, turning to Sybil, I do not like to differ with the lady in a matter of her own experience. But as we are in search of the truth, and the truth happens to be of the most vital importance to our safety, I feel constrained to assure you that this door, from its very appearance, assures us that it cannot have been opened within half a century, and that consequently your own experience of the last night cannot have been a reality, but must have been in a dream. I wish you could dream such a one, and then you would know something about it, answered Sybil. I think you will have to come to my theory about the opium, put in Mr. Berners, especially as I have pursued my phantom one stage farther in her flight, and am able to assign a possible motive for her secret visits to the chapel. Ah, do that, and we will think about agreeing with your views. Now, then, the motive, exclaimed Pendleton. A lover? Oh, yes, a lover. She comes here to meet him, and not liking eyewitnesses to the courtship. She drugged us, said Mr. Berners triumphantly. That is the most violent and far-fetched theory of the mystery. Nothing but our desperate need of an elucidation could excuse its being put forward, said Captain Pendleton dryly. Then he spoke more earnestly. Berners, whatever may be the true explanation of all that we have experienced here, one thing seems certain, that your retreat here is known to at least one person, who may or may not be inimical to your interest. Now my advice to you is still the same. Stop this girl the first time you see her again, and compel her to give an account of herself. Conceal your names and stations from her if possible, and in any case bribe her to silence upon the subject of your abode here. If it were prudent, I should counsel you to leave this chapel for some other place of concealment, but really there seems now more danger of moving than in keeping still. So I reiterate my sacrifice that you shall enlist this strange girl in your interests. But before cooking your hare, you must catch it, said Sybil. We may see this visitant a dozen times more, but we will never be able to stop her. She appears and vanishes, is seen and gone in an instant. But Captain Pendleton, I will tell you what I wish you to do for me. I will do anything in the world that you wish, except believe in ghosts. Then you will bring me a crowbar, or whatever the tool or tools may be with which strong doors may be forced. I want that grated iron door forced open, that we may go down into that vault and see what it holds. Good heavens, Mrs. Berners, he exclaimed, striking a theatrical attitude. Wouldst bid me burst the loathsome charnel house and spread a pestilence? I want to see what is in it, and I will, persisted Sybil. Bring the tools when you come again, Pendleton, and we will open the door and examine the vault, added Mr. Berners. Ugh, you will find it full of coffins and skeletons, and marrow horrible and awful, while even to name would be unlawful. You are in a poetical mood, Pendleton. You are in a sepulchral one, both effects of the opium, I suppose. My reading has become dreadful, like I'm under opium. While they talked, the sun went down. Captain Pendleton remained with his friends until the twilight deepened into darkness, and then, promising to return the next night, and wondering where he should find his horse or how he should get home, he took leave and departed. The strange life of the refugees in the haunted chapel seriously interfered with their hitherto regular and healthful habits. They had slept nearly all day, when they should have been awake, and now they intended to watch all night, partly because it was impossible for them to sleep any more then, and partly because they wished to stop their mysterious visitant in the event of her reappearance. And with that, I will stop because I am approaching the 30-minute mark and it's not going to be able to fit it all in. Goodbye till tomorrow. Bye-bye.